And this is where I always tell people, look, follow the money.
It requires effort. It requires engagement, true engagement. You got to say yes. Some way, somehow, say yes.
That's where the innovation comes. We cannot be complacent.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Move, Crush, Count, a podcast produced by J&L Marketing. This is a show where we take great brands and show you how they differentiate themselves. We show you how to strike back against a world that's trying to marginalize and commoditize you. Very special guest today, Mr. Tom Bulleit. He is the founder of Bulleit Distilling Company, Bulleit Bourbon, Bulleit Rye. The title of today's episode is How to Bulletproof and Grow Your Business Like the Pros. Mr. Bulleit is an expert when it comes to business disruption, and that's exactly what his brand of Bulleit Bourbon did in a very crowded marketplace. The gold nuggets are everywhere. He walks you through his early struggles, and it's an incredible story of how he grew this into a worldwide power. So let's dive right in, and we'll talk to Mr. Bulleit.
You're listening to Move, Crush, Count, hosted by Scott Joseph.
Today we've got a great business leader, more importantly, and disruptor expert in Tom Bulleit. He is the founder of the Bulleit Distilling Company. He is going to share his experiences and his business strategies that helped him grow the Bulleit Distilling Company into a worldwide power. So welcome, Tom Bulleit.
Scott, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun. I should start out by saying we're miscast completely. I'm Scott. This is Tom.
Well, hey, like I said prior, as long as everything that goes with that is exchanged too, we'll take it.
You don't want this amount of patina, trust me.
So, you're a hand-on expert in the subject of business disruption. You have graciously agreed to do this interview. We appreciate that. I know the MCC Nation appreciates it. This is an exciting interview for me because we're actually recording this in your home. So this is awesome. It's not often, in fact, you're the first, where I am doing an interview inside a Bourbon Hall of Famer's house.
Well, you're more than welcome, and this is really my honor. Thank you so much. I love to talk. In due course, we'll talk about relationships. We're in a relationship business. Everyone is really, and our family home. And here is something that Betsy and we've lived here for 40 years. So it's an honor to have you as a guest.
Yeah, thank you. And so I get excited about interviewing people, especially when they achieve high levels of success. I've read your book. All right, I'm going to do a little plug here, and that'll be not the last plug we do, but you've had high levels of success in everything you've pretty much attempted, at least the things that you attempted that were in the book.
Well, I have never really thought about it that way, Scott. The book, if read closely, is about not being bulletproof and really overcoming certain things, and because life will present its challenges moment to moment, particularly in business and particularly in starting a business. I've had I think the best use far and away that I have ever been put to was I was a corpsman with the 1st Marine Division in Vietnam a long time ago. That's what I am most proud of by far, a Vietnam veteran. And but the business we're here to talk about business today. And there are challenges, and then of course, as the book talks about, I'm a cancer survivor, so health is a challenge, and business is. I'm a lawyer, and school. We'll talk about that a little bit too. School was a challenge. Trinity High School for you Louisvillians.
That's where I graduated.
Yeah.
I knew that there was some greatness in you.
And you as well, Scott. And you as well. Fortuitously, you did not go to St. X.
No, I did not.
My brother-in-law, God bless him, went to St. X. He is dumb as a post. Actually, he's a genius electrical engineer. But Ronnie's a wonderful man. I have two of the best brother-in-laws in the world. My
brother-in-law went to St. X as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know what happened to our sisters. They went astray, didn't they? Well, Trinity, if from you all who are from Louisville will know, if you're from Louisville and you're in Topeka or Schenectady, and I would run into you, the very first thing we would ask each other where did you go to school? And it could have been Yale or Indiana, the University of Kentucky or Bellarmine. It makes no difference with where you went to high school. Yes. So Trinity boys. That's almost the end of the interview, isn't it? We're Trinity boys. Thank you. Thank you.
So I wanted the audience to get a real good understanding of your story and your background and your experience level. So I pulled an interesting thing here, and I think it's a great way to kind of segue into our first question. So in your book, Bulletproof, you say, I don't believe our lives are told in years or months or weeks. I believe we live our lives in moments. That's what you remember most. So I thought, well, wow, if you're going to talk about your experience and how all this started and what did you learn along the way that prepared you for this, what a better segue than from this book than that. So what are some of those moments that stand out to you that really shaped who you are and what made all of this possible?
Well, I think we absolutely live our lives in moments. I think John Le Carre also said, maybe a quote in there, that we live much more of our life than we remember. And these moments that are striking, for instance, we were talking a little bit about my background, and I'm Trinity High School. After Trinity High School, I went to the University of Kentucky. We were in Lexington, Kentucky. That's 3 blocks down the street here in the old part of Lexington. So I went to University of Kentucky, and then I went to the military for a while. And then on the GI Bill, went to the University of Louisville Law School, and then did a graduate degree in law at Georgetown in Washington, D.C., an LLM in tax, it's called, when I was working for the Treasury Department. And I would say about law, in our house we say God bless the lawyers. Few people pray like that. But my legal background, I practiced business law for a long time, and my legal background has really served me well, Scott. It is, Betsy would say, it's something that I use moment to moment, if not the actual law, the methodology of practicing law. But if we talk about a moment, a very particular moment, I remember coming home after spending some years at the University of Kentucky, some years. My father was a Notre Dame egghead. He's a disabled Second World War veteran, best man I've ever known in my life by far. And I got home and said, Dad, I'm going to be a master distiller like Uncle Jim. And he said, Tom, your undergraduate work has been absolutely abysmal. And it was so abysmal, I didn't know what the word meant. And I said, thanks, Dad. And you probably had if you're a Trinity boy, yep. Your dad has looked at you and rolled his eyes any number of times. You know that exact look.
When I was working with my dad before I started my own company, I remember going into his office and telling him, hey, I'm going to start this agency. And he looked at me square in the eye and said, you'll be back here in 3 months.
Well, we have lived...
That was 30 years ago.
We have lived parallel lives, yeah. 30 plus years ago.
So when I started reading your book, I texted you. There were, especially the first 3 or 4 chapters, I was like, man, this is just... I want to read and I want to do my research, but I did feel like there were some... I wasn't a good student either. I was horrible. But... I never turned that around. You clearly did. So let me ask you, what was the turning point for you? Because you clearly became a very good student later in life, to become a lawyer 2 different times, right? I mean, you've got 2 different, so at Louisville and then Georgetown. So what clicked, what happened there?
Well, I think from being immature to growing up, literally, I think some young people have great focus in undergraduate school. When I went to undergraduate school in the early 60s, it was, people didn't, like when my children went to school, all they did was study all the time. We didn't. Yeah. And there was not a great expectation that you would. Now you have to, of course, now then. And you could, if you pass the LSAT, you could go to law school. You didn't have to have the stellar grades you do now. I think the intervening thing was the Vietnam War. You grow up. I married and went to war and came back, and that, and I guess a recurrent theme, fear. If I would have gone today, come home from Vietnam and said, okay, Dad, I'll be in my room, he would have said, this is your mother's house and mine, Tom. You'll be getting your own house. Our own apartment, of course.
You bring up fear, and throughout the book, I think you're quoted a few times in there in talking about how fear is a great motivator for you. And I think the audience, there's a lot of people in the audience that probably can relate to that. Some people are motivated by pleasure, moving towards a goal. And to some extent, we're probably all motivated a little bit in both directions, but you bring up fear a lot. So how did that motivate you?
Well, I think fear is a great motivator. As I was saying, coming home from Vietnam, I was not particularly a good undergraduate. Did get into the University of Louisville and passed the LSAT. I'll back up just a minute and say that my father, in response to I want to be a master distiller, he says, actually, Tom, you will be a lawyer, and then you will be going in the military now like everyone else. And I did. With those men in that generation, they were old warriors, they were old soldiers, they were serious men, they were a bit aloof, wonderful men, not particularly affectionate, but really old-fashioned iron men. You did what they said. If I would say to my son Tucker, I think it'd be great if you would be a lawyer, he would say, I've got a guitar and I'm going to Nashville, Dad. So no, but I would not have even asked the question, have even tried to make that influence. So when I went to Vietnam, I remembered my father's admonition that said, you're going to be a lawyer. So I went we were in Ac, a little bit north of Da Nang in Vietnam. I went to the gunnery sergeant and said, Gunny, I would like to go down to Da Nang. We'd been there so long, they had an infrastructure down there, and take the LSAT. And he said, what the blank? And that what he really meant, of course, that can mean anything. It's like, forget about it. It can mean yes, no, maybe, I don't care. It can mean, but what that really meant is Corporal, get out of my face. I don't talk to anybody under sergeant. So I waited a little bit until he had a couple beers, maybe a couple beers, and gunnery sergeants have a sweet spot at some point. It's about 6.5 beers. And I said, Gunny, same question, same answer, but it meant yes. And he must have talked to Dad, because he got a Jeep for me. I'm here, the driver's here, machine gunner in the back, and we went down Highway 1 into Da Nang, and I put my pistol on the table, and we took the SAT, and I passed. And law school, everybody in this room could go to law school, but it's a huge volume of material. The first few days, they send you home with 200 or 300 pages a night to read. I don't think in undergraduate school I read 200, 300 pages. And then you sit in class, and if you're called on and you don't know the answer and haven't read the material, the first thing that first year your professor will say is, I don't know if law is a career for you. You may want to drop out now. And you're going, oh, wow. So not sure of my academic ability, I dove in, and it was a fearful time. And then what sort of job? I had an English major, undergraduate business and history, and that's sort of adaptable, much more adaptable now than it was then to careers. But I needed to find something, and then you come back generationally. My parents lived through the Depression, lived through the Second World War. They knew the value of having a job, of keeping a job, and the possibility of losing one.
Why were you so passionate about getting into the bourbon industry?
Well, I worked, when I was growing up, my father got me some of the most dreadful jobs in the world to keep me in school. He said, well, I'm going to show you what really hard work is, and some of it I really liked. He didn't know how much he appreciated that. But one of the jobs, my jobs were so dreadful that Dad was getting me. I went down and talked to some of my relatives and some of his friends and spent a few summers at the Bernheim Distillery down in Louisville and just fell in love with it. And in our family, we have a huge family, and most of whom are in Bardstown, and in one way or another affiliated with the bourbon industry. And really loved the industry. I did not know about a lot of it, but I did know about the pot stirring end of it. And I'm certainly not a chemist. I'm a businessman. I'm not a master distiller. But I know how bottling lines work. I know how the distillery works. I love the whole rhythm of it. It's our great Kentucky industry. And our family had been in it. My father told me at the time, he noticed that I had great passion and interest in this. And he said, well, we have an old family recipe. your great-great-grandfather Augustus had a recipe. I said, well, what was that? He said, well, I've been told by my father, and his father told him. He said, he said, you might want to get a pen and write it down, Tom. It's pretty complicated. I said, well, all right, Dad. And I write that. He said, 2/3 corn, 1/3 rye. I said, is that it? I said, Dad, I can remember that, for heaven's sakes. And I went back to him in 1987, my father, and I said, Dad, I still want to do this. And because he was the sort of man you would ask. And he said, well, Tom, that's up to you and your banker, which meant no money for me. But and very similarly to our parallel past, he looked at me. I was working at the time with a law firm, Bulleit, Kincaid, Irvin, and Lionheart. There were 14 of us. We built the firm, another entrepreneurial sort of activity. Most of us had been with the federal government in one capacity or another. And our emphasis was hard mineral, Eastern hard mineral law. And we'd built a nice business. And I bought this house. We'd been here for 41 years or whatever. And they'd been here. And this is a nice house, not grand, just home. And he thought, well, you're doing fine. You've got a job. Why take a chance? A lot of those men were not willing to take a chance if they were well employed. And I said, well, I really want to do this. And he thought, very similar to your father, that, well, don't give up your day job before your night one comes on, Tom.
Yeah, and that's a risk, you know, if you've got a nice home and things are humming along good, to just sit there and say, I'm going to put my time and energy and focus over here to something that outside of working some summer jobs or some time when you were younger and not necessarily running the business part of that, it's a big risk. So what was it inside you that just said, now's the time?
I think I had practiced law for quite a while and built some equity in the house. My advice to entrepreneurs who are listening is, if you want to become an entrepreneur, marry somebody who has a good job. That always really helps. Betsy's spent she's in her 44th year, I should say fourth, she's such a young person, 44th year with Hilliard Lyons. And she's always had a very successful practice as a financial advisor. And was able to pick up the slack as I transitioned from law into distilling.
So let me ask you this question. I sit here and I hear military and I hear the law practice, and I can't, so I'm going to jump forward a little bit because I know eventually you sell your bourbon company, the distilling company, to not Diageo, but it eventually gets to Diageo.
Yeah, Seagrams, right.
And we'll go through that.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of business leaders out there that are entrepreneurs that have that dream, that end goal, right? They're like, wow, I can't wait till maybe some big company brings me in, and they think dollars, right? But I can't help but think a lot of people never go forward with that step out of fear, the unknown, whereas with your law practice, you probably were you probably had some sort of big contract type negotiations, or were involved in them with other businesses where you saw some of this mechanics, and maybe that didn't scare you. I don't know. I read the book and I'm like, man, he seemed fearless through that.
Well, I'm a commercial lawyer.
Yeah.
I practiced.
How did that help prepare you for
Others,
this?
it's huge. I've incorporated people. I've given them business advice and mergers and acquisitions. So I know business law, and I know business from knowing business law. And there's really a point where you're giving business advice mixed with legal advice, because I've had a lot of experience in that with various businesses. It occurred to me at one point while I was giving, that I was giving what I thought, and they did too, was good business advice, and there's a little bit about scale as well. It occurred to me that practicing law, if I'm not there, nothing's happening. We had 14 people in the firm, and I was the senior partner. But nonetheless, I have really good friends that are in law firms that have 2,000 lawyers. And if you get to the top end of that, you can then you can reach a scale proposition. But you have to be a very big law firm not to not to create sufficient scale that it's just not you and your hourly billing. I said, well, there's only one of me. Yeah. If I want to be an entrepreneur, and I've always kind of my law degree, and I think my education was entrepreneurial. You know, I wasn't driven to be a lawyer for some specific purpose. It was a business for me. And I thought, well, if you really want to achieve scale, you need to get down on the field. You can't. And as a lawyer giving advice, I was up here talking to businessmen, but I needed to be in the game instead of back here giving the advice as a consultant. And that applies to some consultants and not others. And some people can create amazing scale as consultants, Anderson and these giant companies. But to get down on the field meant that I needed to get into business. And what business would that be? I always had great passion for the bourbon industry, but it's a very old traditional industry. At the time when I went into it in 1987, bourbon was not particularly popular at that time. The vodkas had come on very heavily. Certainly wine, beer, bourbon was not advertising. We'd agreed not to advertise in the 50s and didn't. So single malt scotches were coming along heavily. It is a hard product to disrupt by other people. For instance, Kentucky straight bourbon needs to be made in Kentucky. It can't be made in Japan. They make a wonderful whiskey in Japan. It can't be made in Ireland or Scotland or France. We have a unique proposition. I think the silver lining, I also love silver linings. If you look, while the bourbon industry was down, it was still substantial. And Uncle Bill Samuels, had introduced Maker's Mark. And with Maker's Mark, a new concept came in. I think that was, I would give him credit for an enormous disruption. We had historically, we would have had 100 proof and 80 proof. For instance, where I worked at Bernheim, we had J.W. Dant was our price point at 80 proof, and I.W. Harper at 100 proof, and those were our premium versus price point. But Bill said, I'm going to introduce a premium bourbon. It tastes expensive and is. That was their first line. And that was a huge disruption in our industry. So I'm a little bit following him in that regard. Later, at an unfortunate time, he was building, but they were very small at that time, and mostly in Kentucky.
So, you bring up a thing that, and this gets into those first 10 years a little bit. In the book, you mentioned the recipe for success was simple, but it wasn't easy. Explain some of those initial challenges you had.
Well, obviously financial. The back to fear a little bit. Gosh, the house was mortgaged and more. We had a little mortgage, and we had a big mortgage, and Betsy was really supporting the family. We had a child in college. It was an interesting time.
A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think, well, business, wow, I've lost all my money. What they don't realize is you can go way past zero.
Oh,
it doesn't stop there.
You can go way past zero. Betsy's description of that at one point was, I have made a close calculation, Tom, and determined that if this doesn't work, you can practice law until you're 117 and a half to pay the interest. So you're out there a bit.
Yeah. So I want to know what your initial, when you started this, I want to know what as a businessman, what were your initial goals? I would find it shocking if you now, I believe in aiming big, all right, and thinking big. I do believe in that. But this is huge. And so I want to know what your initial goals were. Did you ever in your wildest dreams think this would be where it's at right now? What were your initial goals?
I think the initial goal was to create a good business, to get down on the field, create a good business that had scale, that wasn't dependent on my hourly input, to create a business. And I had dreams. I mean, if you don't dream them, it's not going to happen. I mean, you've got to have dreams. That's right. So I wanted us to have substantial scale. To be where we are now, it would be foolish to say I did not expect this. I think, you come back to be able to become associated with Seagram's and then Diageo, and to have these huge financial commitments as partners. I also thought that, well, this will take about as long as law school, maybe 3 years. This is the 33rd year. So it's been a long, arduous process with me all in almost every day. I travel 150 days a year for 2 decades at least, as brand ambassador and doing marketing consulting with Diageo. And it's been a arduous, long trip, and it is a trip. Like I don't think we've. It was interesting, and the entrepreneurs in the audience and the businessmen will recognize this. You will have a success. Like when we got together with Seagram's, I remember standing on Park Avenue looking at the Seagram's building, which is grand beyond imagination. And standing out front, we've just done this deal with Seagram's and partnered. They were the largest distilling company in the world at the time, the largest beverage alcohol company in the world. And feeling this sort of, is that it?
This would be a moment.
This would be a moment. And the moment was not touchdown. It was just sort of confusing. What happens next? Because in my experience, business is about the chase. It's an ongoing proposition. Like right now, I'm thinking about international distribution. We have tariffs. We have some all sorts of things going on in Europe. Europe is becoming a good market, as Asia will, as a little bit in due course. But I'm thinking about international markets. It's always a journey. Once you get there, it would be wonderful if it were just, wow, that's great.
What attracted Seagram's to you initially?
My youth and height. I'm 36, about 6'4". Well, we have, which is a very peculiar story. I was practicing law and have a very good friend in New York who I'd practiced law for some years. And he had a good friend. He was a member of the Metropolitan Club. This is a key to success right here, if you know a member of the Metropolitan Club. Have him meet with one of the Brofman's advisors in the steam room. And Ed Allen said to one of his buddies there at the Metropolitan Club, you know, my friend down in Louisville has gone crazy. He started a bourbon. He's a great lawyer. I don't know what he's doing. He said, you're kidding. He said, no. So what's his name? He said, well, Tom Bulleit. What? He said, I love that name. Bulleit. How do you spell it? B-U-L-E. I said, that is really cool. You know, the Brofmans. I was just with Edgar Brofman Jr. We represent them. It was Daldane and Bernbach in New York. And he said they're reaching out. They want to come back into bourbon business. And they thought about, was it Brofman bourbon, Seagram's bourbon? You know, but I love that name. And so, ironically, the name was what they picked up, my genius in creating the name. Zero input on that. And so long story short, so eventually I went up and met with Edgar Brofman Jr. and his I love art, and they have an amazing abstract expressionist, I mean, $1 billion worth of art in the front room. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is something different for little Tommy from Crescent Hill in Louisville. So, but we got along quite well. And he said, well, I'm going to have my people take a look at it, and we talked for about a year and got together with them. So it really arrived out of networking.
And I think there's a lot of people where maybe some of those opportunities have come and they've shied away and come up with excuses or logical reasons as to why that wasn't the right fit for them or whatever. They talk themselves out of it, and sometimes it's just fear because maybe this was never in their initial plan and like, wow, this is a lot bigger. They're not comfortable with it. It takes them out of a comfort zone, but you seemed very comfortable with it in reading the book, that element of it. And I think that's where the law part really helped you.
If Betsy would say law and ability to deal with change. Yeah. I wrote a business plan in 1987. I went over to the library. Do you all know what a library is? That's where you get books, but you have to bring them back. Nobody knows what a library is anymore. There was no online at the time. So I wrote a business plan, and I think you need to start with something.
Yeah.
Just otherwise you don't know where you're going. You need a plan. But you also need to know that's going to change. There's no question that's going to change. I thought, for instance, at the same time we were negotiating with Seagram's, I was working on a small offering, about $6 or $7 million that I was going to use for marketing and advertising. You know, I know about marketing and advertising, zero. That would have been completely wasted money. But when we started talking to Seagram's, this is how you achieve scale. The other thing, and we talk about if there's one thing that really popped up and surprised me, as a person who's historically had our family's done everything in the bourbon business way before I did. What really surprised, distribution. Distribution is huge in our business. You can make anything. Can you sell it? Who's going to sell it? What are the distribution? And in beverage alcohol, we have an unbelievable distribution infrastructure, but it is owned by huge families, big families. They're family companies, huge companies, and to get together with them is really, really difficult. Mm-hmm. And for them to prioritize you over somebody else, there was no way. All of a sudden, it occurred to me in the middle of these negotiations, I am never going to be able to achieve distribution and respect for my product with the crucial salespersons unless I have the introduction coming through Seagram's and the power of their massive portfolio. Yeah. And their relationships, we're all in the relationship business with their distributors. So distribution was, if anybody's out there thinking about products, distribution is unbelievably big.
It's one of the golden nuggets I took from the book, and that is that, so I've got a business and an agency where we're selling to tier 3 auto dealers, all right? That's the auto dealer, independent business owner, right? Mm-hmm. I've also got relationships with the manufacturer and their area managers. That is where I can enhance and get my exposure. But like you said, if I can't convince them, they have a lot of priorities as well that don't all revolve around our agency. Totally. And so I got out of that book, I was like, I'm going to take a lot of what you did to grow that part of your network. And so for all the business leaders out there that their businesses have strategic alliances with other companies, but things aren't there, they've got to find ways that their business becomes a priority for those distributors or whatever else. Because that really, in reading your book, that's when things started to explode for you, it looked like, in terms of the actual sales of the product. So you had the distribution and all the things set up, the foundation, but didn't necessarily take off right away for you either. You still had a lot of hard work that you had to put in.
Oh gosh, I got so many no's on, Tom, we have just exactly enough bourbons. Can't tell you how many no's I got with that. But and then even in distribution and also the breadth and depth of the distribution, we have 50 states. There are 50 ABCs. They're all different. That's right. 19 control states. They're all different. Yeah. So just we spent, gosh, maybe from 6-7 years just getting out there in the market, getting on the shelf legally in 50 states. And now I think we're in all 50 states, obviously, in 74 countries. But only the big companies like Seagram's can do things like that.
What's a tip that you wish someone would have told you early on that would have shortened the curve for you in terms of getting where it started to where it is today? What's a tip that you just wish, man, if someone would have only told me this in 1987, things would have happened a lot sooner?
Gosh, I can almost turn that. I'm going to turn that upside down to you. Or a lawyer. The other is I thank you that nobody said distribution to me in 1987, or I wouldn't have done it. Yeah. Or nobody said to me, okay, Tom, 33 years and going. How about that? You want to sign up for that? So go, well, gosh, I'm with it 3 years and I'm going to line up the Ferraris. You wouldn't believe it. So. And I'm kidding about the Ferraris. If you don't build a business for your grandchildren, you'll never get there. It has nothing to do with I'm gonna build this, sell it, and buy a Ferrari, because you won't have the You won't be all in enough. You won't have the passion to go forward. You need to build it for your grandchildren. Now somebody may come along and buy it, and you'll know when that's going to happen because they'll give you the money, period. But my focus, and I've said that to 100 people I've represented through the years, they would say, oh, we're going to build this business, and then we're going to sell. I said, well, if you're building a business to sell, then it's unlikely that you will have sufficient commitment to create the business.
That's a great point, and it makes me think of something. I have a philosophy when it comes to competing in a commodity type business. And so, listen, when I go into a liquor store, I'm going to see, it seems like hundreds and hundreds, shelves never ending with the choice of what bourbons I could buy, right? So you've got to do a very good job of finding a way to differentiate yourself and compete on that. So my question to you is this. So how do you fight, what makes, I'll just make this simple and then I'll go into my philosophy on it based on your answer. What makes Bulleit different? What makes it better?
Well, a number of things, and that's back to disrupting a traditional industry that we've been talking about, and that is a unique mash bill, which is a recipe. Believe it or not, that simple little 2/3, 1/3 corn was something no one was doing, and it makes the bourbon drier. It makes a bourbon.
Why is that important?
That mixology. Okay. All of a sudden, we rose. One of the things that Bulleit rose with is we became a cult brand in the on-trade, in the bars and restaurants, because it's so compatible with mixology. It's not too sweet. It was less sweet. That was huge. That was certainly not my intention. My intention was to do a family recipe. Again, fell uphill into a taste profile and a style profile that was compatible with mixology.
So you've got a high quality bourbon where bartenders, and you're all over in the book talking about the importance of the bartenders. So where a bartender said, this bourbon is ideal for what I want to do. I mean, there are bartenders out there now making six figures. Sure. The really good ones, and sure. They're mixologists. They're not.
Yeah,
good
bartenders.
And so, don't know if you know him, but we actually did a couple recordings up in New York City at Please Don't Tell. With Jeff Bell.
Yeah. Please Don't Tell is great.
Yes, and so
PDT.
It was a great.
Did you go through the phone booth?
Yes, we did. Speakeasy in there, and
of course I know those people. It was wonderful people.
And you know, he does a great drink with your bourbon as well.
I'm gonna stop you for 1 minute.
Yeah.
The other half of that answer, and you alluded to it earlier, was packaging.
Yes.
I think what we wanted to do with our packaging is we wanted, and Seagram's, that we have some prior packaging here that I'll show you was okay, but Seagram's, I was using an open mold, and they said, we're Joseph E. Seagram, we don't use open molds. It's a little bit like I'm Chevy Chase and you're not. Yeah. So we went to Steve Sandstrom to design. We looked all over the place and selected Steve Sandstrom. His charge was we don't want it to look like anything else. We want to see the whiskey. We want it to reflect the heritage of the brand. Yeah. And he did a brilliant job in doing that. The packaging has won, double gold medal in San Francisco for package. It won all the awards you can win, as has the whiskey. But I think that packaging, Cousins Beam will say, what's in the bottle is the most important thing. They're dead right. Yeah. You have to have the product. But the packaging is huge. When you're looking at that shelf and you look at the multiplicity of products there, that packaging really needs to speak to you.
Your bottle stands out on the shelves. And I love the fact that the majority of what you're looking at is the art inside.
The whiskey, right?
Yeah, and it is. It's just a great color, and so there's something that's neat about looking at a bottle of bourbon or whiskey, and the fact that so a lot of brands, they'll cover it with labels, and you don't see it as much. Your old one was like that.
Yeah.
I know you're passionate, and in reading this book, I know you believe this is the best bourbon in the world. And it's won awards, so you've got evidence and social proof to help back you up on that. But to me, when you're going around, especially in those early years between 87 and to land that initial contract with Seagram's, to me, if you're going to win in a commodity market, it has to start with you. Your self-belief in your belief in you, your belief in your product, the quality of the product, and what you're at. Because if you believe you're like anyone else, oh, and here's just another whiskey, but I'm a better businessman, I'm a better salesperson, or I just want to get in and out of this. That's all about the dollars for me. That's what got me going on this question. That never works, and so you have a tremendous mindset, I think. That allows you to overcome and strike back because you don't believe you're a commodity. You believe you have better packaging. You believe you have better, and if you don't start from that, you can't win.
I think, and I would state that a little bit differently. I think in our style of bourbon, it is the best. For instance, we go back to Maker's Mark. It makes a great bourbon. It's a different style. Yeah. Wonderful packaging. I think, but each person, and I know Bill very well, Bill Samuels, and he has confidence in his product. He has confidence in himself. He has a wonderful product. I think we have a wonderful product. They're very different. Sometimes, and we are all to some extent, we all get along very well.
It's a very unique
in the industry.
Let me tell you, that's a very unique because not a lot of industries can say that. I think a lot of them are coming around to it because there's such a sharing of knowledge and best practices. I think a lot of that has to do with the internet and things such as that. But the bourbon industry, Corky was saying the same thing. You all help each other. I mean, you have all the time, and you all speak well of each other.
Yeah. We're all related. It's Kentucky. But Bill, certainly, what Maker's a great product. I think we have a great product. I love the style of it. I think it's 2/3, 1/3. It's a unique proposition with our rye. It's 95% rye. A lot of the rye products are in the 50s or 60s in rye. I have great confidence they're wonderful premium products. You certainly have to believe that, and you have to maintain consistency. And you come back to sort of confidence. You have to pinch yourself regularly and say, "Get confident, Tom. It's going to go better in the future." I love the philosophy of Romanata, which is the power of patience. The power of patience and the absolute conviction of ultimate success. If you don't have that, you have tenacity, perseverance. There's many levels of that. Yvonne Breezy, who was a vice president in charge of the whiskey portfolio at Diageo, once called me maniacal. I don't think that was a compliment. But she said if you start with tenacious and go persevere and possessed, maniacal's probably. She said you've just been maniacal about this. But you have to have that commitment, and Bill has too. It was interesting that and Bulleit is an interesting case study, as is Maker's. Both and very different. Maker's took advantage of advertising, and particularly out of home billboard advertising. And so he traditional approach, house in Louisville, Noah Anderson, great house in Louisville. But Bill was president. I credit him with a lot of that creativity. It was just a definitive proposition. We did almost the opposite, and relatively unique is that we did no advertising. It was all ambassadorship. It was all shaking hands. It was all, I've been in thousands of bars. I know the bartenders in America. I know the families in our distribution infrastructure very well. So it's been creating relationships for decades long. Now we are doing some light advertising, but really not much. Everybody's doing things in social media and the digital world now, and we do some of that. But the brand, the foundation to get to where we are, to merit a $500 million investment, was built in a completely atraditional manner.
Where do you see business leaders wasting a lot of time when it comes to trying and become a disruptor?
Well, I think, and I'm not focus, and that goes in two meanings. My focus is that I don't know how to answer that question because I'm just paying attention to what I'm. Betsy says stick to your knitting. Yeah. I think to maintain a focus. I think, and what we've done, and I'm going to invite Bill into this conversation with some regularity. God bless him. And it is that we make one product. we kind of stick with that. We're not across the board. We're not in different businesses. We have one theme. We're Bulleit Bourbon is makers. Now we do make our rye now, which was almost like a complete, to me that is less of an innovation than a new product. It's a completely different type of whiskey.
Right.
But now they're part of the family, obviously. But I think to maintain that focus and to look at that, what drives 80% of the business, people get lost in the 20% minutia. The biggest challenges, the most the people that pull on you most will be in the 20%, and that's not where you're going to get ahead. You need to pay attention to that 80%. What's the big picture?
Yep, that's a great point. Where do you think, or where are the big opportunities to disrupt an industry that you think a lot of business leaders might be missing?
I will jump back to change. We are experiencing now in America, I'm 38, as I mentioned, some 38s. And this is Tom, by the way. I'm Scott. We've miscast again here. We are going through such dramatic changes now. People are at home. They're to some extent they're settling in with that. They're utilizing certainly Facebook, social media. They're utilizing Zoom and all the variants of that to interact. I have always thought, I remember, as a great example, I remember in the 90s when we first got together with Seagram's. I said, well, Seagram says, all right, we want to pitch this. You're going to be in Asia Pacific in Sydney. We're going to do some distribution in Asia. So we want to get on the phone in London, New York, Sydney, Hong Kong, and Tokyo. And everybody's going to be, and you're going to do a tasting for those people. And we're going to do it on a video conference. Well, the cables were about this big. The screen was this big. The cables were about this big. I think it cost $5,000 an hour. And I did that. And people had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and say, I can't believe it. I've never even heard of this guy or this brand. Who cares? But they did. And I've always wondered, why don't we use that magical medium, which is Zoom, of course, is a successor to that. And now it's all but free. Yeah. And before COVID, it was kind of, all right, well, I'm going to fly out to LA and have a 45-minute meeting. And sometimes you have to do that. There's nothing like being there.
That's right.
But you don't have to be there all the time. And look at what you're saving and the efficiency that creates. If you can say, Joe, what's the weather like in LA? Good. How about New York? We're doing pretty good here too. Yeah. The efficiency is unbelievable. Things are going to change. And I think there's going to be all sorts of disruption. And I think people are going to identify new opportunities, new businesses.
I think you're 100% accurate. So in my own business, we've created what we call the fourth box, and it involves bourbon. And so this week I'm going to be featuring the 12-year rye that your Bulleit 12-year rye on that episode. They've become almost more intimate than anything I've done recently with customers and clients and prospects. I've developed friendships with people. I've got some relationships that have formed just since this has started that I would put up against any I've had in the last 10 to 20 years.
That's so interesting. And that is an insight. That means, that's a huge insight, because that means it works. Yes. Because my presumption would be, well, you can do it a little, but then you have to be there. Yeah. But your point is,
I can't wait to see these people in person.
But you can also create extraordinary relationships without being there.
Correct.
That's huge.
It's been just a really neat thing. It's great to celebrate it and enter the, we do bourbon and cigars with it, and that's kind of a fun thing. I love, all right, so on the title of your book, on the cover, the background thing, because I want to go into this story because it plays a big role, I think, and I liked the vagueness of it in here. After reading it, I understand what you're meaning by Revolver. So I love the story behind this. How I took a 150-year-old family recipe and a revolver and disrupted the entire liquor industry, one bottle, one sip, one handshake at a time. So when people first see that, right, they're thinking, Revolver? Well, heck, I can't wait to get to that part. So walk us through how, because it goes in with the bartenders and the distribution. Walk us through a little bit of that.
Well, we identified, back up just a little bit, in 1991, I went to New York and met with John Magliocco. The Magliocco family is now they're part of Sunbelt Charmer and Charlie Marinoff's and Rocky Wirt's business breakthrough, but they had, I think, 22,000 accounts at the time. They were the primary distributor in New York, Metro New York, or one of the primary, Peerless distribution. And I sat down with him and I asked him, would you distribute Thoroughbred, from this, go back to the story, the predecessor of Bulleit, and he talked to me a little bit about that. He went to Penn, brilliant man, and he said, Tom, the brands are built on premises, and the bartenders are the captains of the industry. Now, I suspect everybody in the business knew that except me that day. And so I took him at his word and said, I'm going to try to get in every bar and really every liquor store, because the clerks are the same thing in the liquor stores and owners. And our distribution families, our distributor salespeople are right in there with them. So I said, I'm going to just get on the plane and just go every place, millions and millions of miles and on the plane, and try to create relationships with these people and do this through ambassadorship, because we had no money to do it otherwise.
And just so people know, just because you signed a contract and an agreement with Seagram's, which then sold to Diageo, that doesn't mean they give you a big ad budget, especially in an industry when bourbon's not hot at the time. They're not throwing money at you to advertise at that.
Our ad budget was zero.
Okay.
So and because it didn't make any, they're enormously sensible big companies, didn't make any sense to spend that kind of money on it. So how can we build the company without the traditional advertising, big advertising?
And I think that's big for our audience to understand that. You built this even after this contract on zero ad budget.
Yeah.
So, or virtually.
Yeah, with really creating relationships, really. One of those relationships with John Center out in San Francisco, who now has Prize Fighter over in Oakland, is a great guy. He was, at the time, was with Bourbon and Branch.
Okay.
And he put together with Steve Beal, who's one of our masters of whiskey. I give him credit, Steve, a lot of credit for creating San Francisco, which is really our lead market for a long time, the Northern California market. But he put together a drink called the Revolver, which is a variation on a whiskey sour, a substantial variation, and a marvelous drink. And it was reviewed in 7 by 7. That's a little city magazine for San Francisco. It's literally 7 miles by 7 miles. And that was picked up. Somehow that became viral before things became viral. This was a long time ago. And was picked up by lots and hundreds of bars across the United States. It became sort of a cult drink, the Revolver with Bulleit. But of course, what I mean by that is these are the captains of the industry. And for instance, when we introduced our rye, it was really, again, I was at that point, I was an entrepreneur on the inside of a big company as a consultant and an entrepreneur, and for markets, budgets, and I wanted to do a rye. Well, when I was pitching the rye to the exec at Diageo, and had some strong support among the mid-level people, they say they came back, Larry Schwartz came back and said, well, Tom, we're not in the hobby business, 10,000 cases, I don't. And I said, but this rye is really coming on. The San Francisco bartender says, you've got a big footprint in rye with your high rye whiskey. Bring us a rye. It's going to come on. It wasn't then. And finally, they said, come to New York and make the pitch. I came to New York and actually got on a telephone conference call with them in Connecticut. I said, I don't know why I just didn't stay in Kentucky, but went to New York for a conference call to Connecticut. Go figure. And Larry, right in the middle of it, had to take another call. I said, oh my gosh. So eventually they said, all right, they said, we're going to do the rye, Tom. I said, oh, that's great. We'll do a bottle and all this stuff. They've got the recipe. This is going to be perfect. And so I went up and asked the CMO finally, Peter McDonough. I said, so I made a pretty good pitch. He said, what? I said, I made a pretty good pitch. He said, the pitch was awful. We just thought you wanted to do it. I said, that's ridiculous. I mean, you've got like 5 gates of possibility of success. Yeah. And why didn't you, fortuitously, I'd pitched the wrong case. I think the bartenders, our cult bartenders, loved the bourbon so much they bought in the rye. So we were in the tens of thousands of cases, 30, 40,000 cases by the end of the month.
Does one help the other from a brand?
I think there's no question. I think one dramatically helps the other. They had confidence in the bourbon, and I've talked to thousands of bartenders at that point, and so and the rye, once again, is really a high rye. It's a great product.
The best Manhattan I've ever had is not in Manhattan. It's actually in Louisville. Jeff Ruby's Steakhouse. I know they have one here in Lexington now. Yeah. It's the second Kentucky Steakhouse. Yeah. The first one's in Louisville. But they make it with your bourbon, and I'm going to tell you, it is phenomenal.
Rye calls for Manhattan. Well, the Manhattan calls for rye whiskey. The original recipe does. Yes. And we had they use Bulleit rye, which is great. Yes. We're very pleased. Thank you, Jack.
And so I'm going to tell you, anybody that comes in, they always want to be treated to different bourbons and this and that they can't get outside of the state, or they don't see it often. And so I always start them with that versus neat. Right. Let them start there. Yeah. Let them get acclimated a little bit, and then we start exploring some neat pours of something, and then but always kick it off with that. Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, good. So, but that goes right back to your mixology of what makes it unique. You know, I mean, I think I've had plenty of Manhattans, but none taste like that.
Yeah, well, I think 95% of rye whiskey has to be 50%, and some of the ryes are far less than 90. I think to pull it up all the way up to 95% gives you a real rye whiskey and a very dry proposition. Pulls more toward the Scotch palate, actually.
All right. So what have we not talked about? Is there an interesting thing? Do you have a secret to your success? You can't say Betsy because everybody knows that after reading the book, all right? Do you have a secret to your success that no one knows about?
Oh, I think, let me think about that. I think
we're looking for an exclusive.
I think probably it wouldn't be much of a secret because anybody that knows me like I don't have hobbies. I'm not a golfer. I've tried to create a hobby and they're just deadly boring. I can't fish. I can't do this or that. I do love to be with the children and do things. Shoot with Tucker. We shoot sporting clays and things like that. But I think the secret is not much of a secret. It's just almost a relentless, maniacal approach with dropping back into that Romanata, the absolute conviction of ultimate success. Because there's been a lot of times when, 4 or 6 years into it, and we're millions of dollars in debt, and Betsy's looking at me like, whoa, what's going to happen here? You have to keep believing. And then when we got together with Seagram's, we were getting ready to go, and then they sold to Diageo. So now we have to make a whole new, create a whole new set of relationships. And that commitment to do that sort of endless commitment, and really the belief that it can be done. And we went through, now of course it's a big brand, but gosh, at one point it was literally, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, and I think, anyone that talks to you or talks about you, it's your authenticity, which quite honestly is very important in a bourbon story and brand. But at the same time, when you mention relationships, so one of the things that you did was to help grow that distribution and get in with those people and convince or motivate them that your bourbon and your rye needed to be a priority And I thought it's another thing I took. I mentioned it earlier. There's some things I took from this as golden nuggets that we're going to start applying as well, especially when all this COVID stuff starts to get a little bit better. You start bringing people here. And you brought up you just brought up the shooting, so that's what reminded me of that. I wanted to get that in.
We did. When we were, we've had we've had 6 or 7 brand managers up to this point, and each one has been extraordinarily timely with the scale of the brand and the purpose and where we were. Ed Bale is the global director at this point. He's a perfect man. He's always had a very strong relationship with supply, which is absolutely crucial at this point. But what we decided to do, and what was economically most efficient because everything else was so expensive, is to bring our distributor salesmen here to Kentucky. And we've in groups of maybe anywhere from 15 to 30 would be typical, and we've had as many as 65 or 70 at one time, but typically a manageable group. So we can meet them, understand who they are, talk about their family, their concerns, their opportunities, and their dreams, get to meet them here. And literally, we've had 3,000 of them to the house here over the years. And we do a wonderful Kentucky experience. We have a unique property, an old mill down on Boone Creek where we eat. We'll take them to Keeneland Racetrack, sometime to Churchill Downs. We'll take them, bring them here to the house. And we shoot sporting clays with them. We were thinking about golf, but a lot of people do golf. I can't. You can learn to shoot sporting clays. Golf is impossible. Yeah. So, and if you're not a golfer, I mean, you almost just can't do it.
Well, we've got beautiful courses here.
But we have wonderful golf infrastructure in Kentucky. Yeah. But with sporting clays, it's with shotguns, super safe. We have one of the University of Kentucky shooting teams standing behind them, managing the whole proposition, and everybody loves it. I think it's something you can do, you can learn to do very quickly, and so our son Tucker is as high class a shooter as you can get. He's a super expert.
Well, for years. Tom, I want to thank you. I'd shake your hand, but we're in the middle of.
We'll do it. We'll do our thing. Scott I'm the one that should be thanking. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's just been delightful. I think we're terribly miscast. This is Tom, actually. I'm Scott.
And everything that goes with it. No, you're an attorney. We got to get that in writing.
Yeah.
I want to do this because, first off, the book tells a great story. All right, and so I want everyone to go out and buy this Bulletproof by Tom Bulleit. Where can they get it? What's the best places?
So they can get it. You can get it on Amazon. There's an ebook, Barnes and Noble, and in your local bookstore. If they don't have it, they can order it. There's an audio book, an ebook, and a hardback. Fortunately, I did not read the audio book.
It's a great read because it's very visual. I'm a visual person, so I'm very. When I'm reading it, I was able to visualize a lot of things. And sometimes you read people, and if when they're talking or writing something, their language is slightly off from yours, and so you got to read things over. It just flowed easy for me. I really enjoyed it.
It's a bit in a conversational style, and it has pictures. It has pictures as well. I'm always big on books with pictures.
There is a small section in the middle with pictures. So again, I am Scott Joseph, your host of Move, Crush, Count. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode.